Chapter 1. A deeply religious non-believer. I don't try to imagine a personal God. It suffices to stand in awe at the structure of the world, insofar as it allows our inadequate sense to appreciate it. Albert Einstein. Deserved respect. The boy lay prone in the grass, his chin resting on his hands. He suddenly found himself overwhelmed by a heightened awareness of the tangled stems and roots. A forest in microsome, a transfigured walls of ants and beetles, and even though he wouldn't have known the detail at the time of soil bacteria by billions, silently and invisibly shoring up the economy of the microworld. Suddenly the microforest of the turf seemed to swell and become one with the universe. And with the rapt mind of the boy contemplating it, he interpreted the experience in religious terms, and it led him eventually to the priesthood. He was ordained an Anglican priest and became a chaplain at my school, a teacher of whom I was fond. It is thanks to decent liberal clergymen like him that nobody could ever claim that I had religion forced down my throat. In another time and place, that boy could have been me under the stars, dazzled by Orion, Cassiopeia, and Ursa Majors, tearful with the unheard music of Milky Way, heady with the night's scents of frangipani and trumpet flowers in the African garden. Why the same emotion should have led my chaplain in one direction and me in the other is not an easy question to answer. A quasi-mystical response to nature and the universe is common among scientists and rationalists. It has no connection with supernatural beliefs. In his boyhood at least, my chaplain was presumably not aware, nor was I, of the closing lines of The Origin of Species, the famous entangled bank passage, with birds singing the bushes, with various insects flitting about, and with worms crawling through the damp earth. Had he been, he would certainly have identified with it, and instead of the priesthood, might have been led to Darwin's view that all was produced by laws acting around us. Thus, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of the higher animals, directly follows. There are grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers have been originally breathed into a few forms or into one, and that whilst this planet has gone ceiling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning endless forms, most beautiful and most wondering have been and are being evolved. Carl Sagan in Pale Blue Dot wrote, "How is it that hardly any major religion has looked at science and concluded this is better than we thought? The universe is much bigger than our prophet said, grander, more subtle, more elegant. Instead, they say, no, my God is a little God and I want him to stay that way." A religion, old or new, that stressed the magnificence of the universe as revealed by modern science might be able to draw forth reserves of reverence and awe hardly trapped by the conventional faiths. All Sagan's books touch the nerve endings of transcendent wonder that religion monopolized in past centuries. My own book have the same aspiration. Consequently, I hear myself often described as a deeply religious man. An American student wrote to me that she had asked her professor whether he had a view about me. Sure, he replied, his positive science is incompatible with religion, but he waxed static about nature and the universe. To me, that is religion. But is religion the right word? I don't think so. The Nobel Prize winning physicist and atheist Steven Weinberg made the point as well as anybody in Dreams of a Final Theory. Some people have views of gods that are so broad and flexible that it is inevitable that they will find God wherever they look for him. One hears it said that God is the ultimate, or God is our better nature, or God is the universe. Of course, like any other word, the word God can be given any meaning we like. If you want to say God is energy, then you can find God in a lump of coal. Weinberg is surely right that if the word God is not become completely useless, it should be used in a way people have generally understood it, to donate a supernatural creator that is appropriate for us to worship. Much unfortunate confusion is caused by failure to distinguish what can be called Einsteinian religion from supernatural religion. Einstein sometimes invoked the name of God, and he is not the only atheistic scientist to do so, inviting misunderstanding by supernaturalists eager to misunderstand and claim so illustrious as thinker as their own, the dramatic, or was it mischievous, ending of Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, for then we should know the mind of God, is notoriously misconstructed. It has led people to believe, mistakenly of course, that Hawkins is a religious man. The cell biologist Ursula Goodenough, in The Scared Depth of Nature, sounds more religious than Hawkins or Einstein's. She loves churches, mosques, and temples, and numerous pages in her book fairly beg to be taken out of the context and used as ammunition for supernatural religion. She goes so far as to call herself a religious naturalist. Yet a careful reading of her book shows that she is really as staunch an atheist as I am. Naturalist is an ambiguous word. For me, it conjures my childhood hero, Hugh Loftings, Dr. Deloitte, who, by the way, had more than a touch of the philosopher, naturalist of HMS Bagley about him. In the 18th and 19th century, naturalists mean what it still means for most of us today. A student of natural world. Naturalist in the sense from Gilbert White on, have often been clergymen. Darwin himself was a destined for the church as a young man, hoping that a leisurely life of a century person would enable him to pursue his passion for beetles. But philosophers use naturalist in a very different sense as the opposite of supernaturalists. Julian Baggini explains in Atheism, a very short introduction on the meaning of an atheist commitment to naturalism. What most atheists do believe is that although there is only one kind of stuff in the universe and it is physical, out of this stuff come minds, beauty, emotions, moral values. In short, the full gamut of phenomena that gives richness to human life. Human thoughts and emotions emerge from exceedingly complex interconnections of physical entities with the brain. An atheist is, in the sense of philosophical naturalist, is somebody who believes there is nothing beyond the natural, physical world. No supernatural creative intelligence lurking behind the observable universe. No soul that outlasts the body, and no miracles, except in the sense of natural phenomena that we don't yet understand. If there is something that appears to lie beyond the natural world as it is now imperfectly understood, we hope eventually to understand it and embrace it with the natural. As ever, when we unweave a rainbow, it will not become less wonderful. Great scientists of our times who sound religious usually turn not to be so. When you examine their beliefs more deeply, this is certainly true of Einstein and Hawkins. The present astronomer royal and president of the Royal Society, Martin Rees, told me that he goes to church as an unbelieving Anglican out of loyalty to the tribe. He has no theistic beliefs but shares the poetic naturalism that the cosmos provokes in the other scientists I have mentioned. In the course of a recently televised conversation, I challenged my friend to obstetrician Robert Winston, a respected pillar of British Jewry, to admit that his Judaism was of exactly this character and that he didn't really believe in anything supernatural. He came close to admitting it but shied at the last fancy. To be fair, he was supposed to be interviewing me, not the other way around. When I pressed him, he said he found that Judaism provided a good discipline to help him structure his life and led a good one. Perhaps it does, but that, of course, has not the smallest bearing on the truth value of any of its supernatural claims. There are many intellectuals, atheists, who proudly call themselves Jews and observe Jewish rites, perhaps out of loyalty to an ancient tradition or to murdered relatives, but also because of a confused or confusing willingness to label as religion the pantheistic reverence which many of us share with its most distinguished exponent, Albert Einstein. They may not believe, but to borrow his phrase from the philosopher Daniel Dennett, they believe in belief. One of Einstein's most eagerly quoted remarks is, "Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind." But Einstein also said, "It was, of course, a lie what you read about my religious convictions. A lie which is being symmetrically repeated. I do not believe in a personal God, and I have never denied this but have expressed it clearly. If something is in me which can be called religious, then it is the unbounded admiration for the structure of the world so far as our science can reveal it." Does it seem that Einstein contradicted himself, that his words can be cherry-picked for quotes to support both sides of argument? No. By religion, Einstein meant something entirely different from what it conventionally meant. As I continue to clarify the distinction between supernatural religion on the one hand and Einsteinian religion on the other hand, bear in the mind that I am calling only supernatural God delusional. I am calling only supernatural gods delusional. Here are some more quotations from Einstein to give a flavor of Einsteinian religion. Quotation, "I am deeply religious non-believer. This is a somewhat new kind of religion. I have never imputed to nature a purpose or a goal or anything that could be understood as anthropomorphic. What I see in nature is a magnificent structure that we can comprehend only very imperfectly, and that must fill a thinking person with a feeling of humility. This is a genuinely religious feeling that has nothing to do with mysticism. The idea of a personal God is quite alien to me. The idea of a personal God is quite alien to me and seems even naive. In greater numbers, since his death, religious apologists understandably try to claim Einstein as one of their own. Some of his religious contemporaries saw him very differently. In 1940s, Einstein wrote a famous paper justifying his statement, "I do not believe in a personal God." This and similar statements provoked a storm of later from the religiously orthodox, many of them alluding to Einstein's Jewish origins. The extracts that follow are taken from Max Jammer's book Einstein and Religion, which is also my main source of quotations from Einstein himself on religious matters. The Roman Catholic Bishop of Kansas City said, "It is sad to see a man who comes from the race of the Old Testament and its teaching deny the great tradition of that race." Other Catholic clergyman chimed in, "There is no other God but a personal God." Einstein does not know what he is talking about. He is all wrong. Some men think that because they have achieved a high degree of learning in some field, they are qualified to express opinion in all. The notion that religion is a proper field in which we might claim expertise is one that sound not go unquestioned. The clergyman presumably would not have deferred to the expertise of claimed fairyologist on the exact shape and color of fairy wings. Both he and the bishop thought that Einstein, being theologically untrained and had misunderstood the nature of God. On the contrary, Einstein understood very well exactly what he was denying. An American Roman Catholic lawyer working on behalf of an ecumenical coalition wrote to Einstein, "We deeply regret that you made your statement in which you ridicule the idea of a personal God. In the past 10 years, nothing has been so calculated to make people think that Hitler had some reason to expel and Jews from Germany as your statements conceding your right to free speech. I still say that your statement constitutes you as one of the greatest sources of discord in America." A New York rabbi said, "Einstein is unquestionably a great scientist, but his religious views are diametrically opposed to Judaism. But why not?" And the president of a historical society in New Jersey wrote a letter that so damningly exposes the weakness of religious mind. It is worth reading twice. It is worth reading twice. We respect your learning, Dr. Einstein, but there is one thing you do not seem to have learned. The God is a spirit and cannot be found through the telescope or microscope. No more than human thought or emotion can be found by analyzing the brain. As everyone knows, religion is based on faith, not knowledge. Every thinking person perhaps is assailed at times with religious doubt. My own faith was wavered many times, but I never told anyone of my spiritual aberrations for two reasons. First, I feared that I might, by mere suggestions, disturb and damage the life and the hope of some fellow being. Second, because I agree with the writer who said, "There is a mean streak in anyone who will destroy another's faith." I hope, Dr. Einstein, that you were misquoted and that you will yet say something more pleasing to the vast number of American people who delighted to do you honor. What a devastatingly revealing letter. Every sentence drips with intellectual and moral cowardice. Less abject but more shocking was the letter from the founder of the Calvary Tabernacle Association in Oklahoma. "Professor Einstein, I believe that every Christian in America will not answer you. We will not give up our belief in our God and His Son Jesus Christ. But we invite you, if you do not believe in the God of the people of this nation, to go back where you came from. I have done everything in my power to be a blessing to Israel. And then you came along and with one statement from your blasphemous tongue do more to hurt the cause of your people than all the efforts of Christians who love Israel can do stamp out anti-Semitism in our land. Professor Einstein, every Christian in America will immediately reply to you. Take your crazy, fallacious theory of evolution and go back to Germany where you came from. Or stop trying to break down the faith of people who gave you a welcome when you were forced to flee your native land." The one thing all his theistic critics got right was that Einstein was not one of them. He was repeatedly indignant at the suggestions that he was a theist. So was he a deist like Voltaire and Diderot, or a pantheist like Spinoza, whose philosophy he admired? I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in orderly harmony of what exists, not in a God who concerns himself with fates and actions of human beings. Let's remind ourselves of the terminology. Atheists believe in a supernatural intelligence who in addition to his main work of creating the universe in the first place is still around to oversee and influence the subsequent fate of his initial creation. In many theistic belief system, the deity is intimately involved in human affairs. He answers prayers, forgives or punishes sins, intervenes in the world by performing miracles, frets about good and bad deeds, and knows when we do them or even think of doing them. A deist too believe in supernatural intelligence, but one whose activities were confined to setting up the laws that govern the universe in the first place. The deist God never intervenes thereafter and certainly has no specific interest in human affairs. Pantheists don't believe in a supernatural God at all, but use the word God as a non-supernatural synonym for nature or for the universe or for the lawfulness that governs its workings. Deists differs from theists in that their God does not answer prayers, is not interested in sins or confessions, does not read our thoughts. Pantheists in that the deist God in some kind of cosmic intelligence rather than the pantheist's metaphoric or poetic synonym for the laws of the universe. Pantheism is sexed up atheism. Pantheism is sexed up atheism. Deism is watered down theism. There is every reason to think that famous Einsteinianism, like God is subtle but he is not miraculous, he does not play dice, or did God have a choice in creating the universe, are pantheistic, not deistic, and certainly not theistic. God does not play dice should be translated as randomness does not lie at the heart of all things. Did God have a choice in creating the universe? Means, could the universe have begun in any other way? Einstein was using God in a purely metaphorical, poetic sense. So is Stephen Hawking, and so are most of the physicists who occasionally slip into the language of religious metaphor. Paul Devias, the mind of God, seems to hover somewhere between Einsteinian pantheism and an obscure form of deism, for which he was rewarded with the Templeton Prize, a very large sum of money given annually by the Templeton Foundation, usually to a scientist who is prepared to say something nice about religion. Let me sum up Einsteinian religion in one more quotation from Einstein himself. To sense that behind anything that can be experienced there is something that our mind cannot grasp and whose beauty and sublimity reaches us only indirectly and as a feeble reflection. This is religiousness. In this sense, I am religious. In this sense, I am too religious. I too am religious, with the reservation that cannot grasp does not have to mean forever ungraspable. But I prefer not to call myself religious because it is misleading. It is destructively misleading because for the vast majority of people, religion implies supernatural. Carl Sagan put it well. If by God one means the set of physical laws that governs the universe, then clearly there is such a God. This God is emotionally unsatisfying. It does not make much sense to pray to the law of gravity. Amusingly, Sagan's last point was foreshadowed by the Reverend Dr. Houghton J. Sheen, a professor at the Catholic University of America, as part of a fierce attack upon Einstein's 1940 disavowal of a personal God. Sheen sarcastically asked whether anyone would be prepared to lay down his life for the Milky Way. He seemed to think he was making a point against Einstein rather than for him, for he added, there is only one fault with his cosmical religion, he put an extra letter in the word, the letter S. There is nothing comical about Einstein's belief. Nevertheless, I wish that physicists would refrain from using the word God in their special metaphorical sense. The metaphorical or pantheistic God of the physicists is a light year away from the interventionists. Miracle-wreaking, thought-reading, sin-punishing, prayer-answering God of the Bible, of priests, mullahs, and rabbis, and of ordinary language, deliberately to confuse the two is, in my opinion, an act of intellectual high treason. Undeserved respect. The God Delusion does not refer to the God of Einstein and the other enlightened scientists of the previous sections. That is why I needed to get Einsteinian religion out of the way to begin with. It has a proven capacity to confuse. In the rest of the book, I am talking only about supernatural gods, of which the most familiar to the majority of my readers will be Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament. I shall come to him in a moment, but before leaving this preliminary chapter, I need to deal with one more matter that would otherwise bedevil the whole book. This time, it is a matter of etiquette. It is possibly that religious readers will be offended by what I have to say and will find in these pages insufficient respect for their own particular beliefs, if not the belief that other treasure. It would be a shame if such offense prevented them from reading on. So I want to short it out here in the outset. A widespread assumption, which nearly everybody in our society except the non-religious included, is that religious faith is specially vulnerable to offense and should be protected by an abnormal thick wall of respect, in a different class from the respect that any human being should pay to any other. The Douglas Adams put it so well in an impromptu speech made in Cambridge shortly before his death, that I never tire of sharing his words. Religion has certainly ideas at the heart of it, which we call scared or holy or whatever. What it means is, here is an idea or a notion that you are not allowed to say anything bad about. You are just not. Why not? Because you are not. If somebody voted for a party that you do not agree with, you are free to argue about it as much as you like. Everybody will have an argument, but nobody feels aggrieved by it. If somebody thinks taxes should go up or down, you are free to have an argument about it. But on the other hand, if somebody says, I must not move a light switch on a Saturday, you say, I respect that. Why should it be that it's perfectly legitimate to support the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, Republicans or Democrats? This model of economic versus that, machine tosh instead of widows, but to have an opinion about how the universe began, about who created the universe, no, that's holy. We are used to not challenging religious ideas, but it is very interesting how much of a furor Richard created when he does it. Everybody get absolutely pedantic about it because you are not allowed to say these things. Yet, when you look at it rationally, there's no reason why those ideas shouldn't be as open to debate as any other, except that we have agreed somehow between us they shouldn't be. Here is a particular example of our society's overweening respect for religion, one that really matters. By far the easiest grounds for gaining conscientious objector status in wartime are religious. You can be a brilliant moral philosopher with a prize-winning doctoral thesis expounding the evils of war and still be given a hard time by a draft board evaluating your claim to be a conscientious objector. Yet if you can say that one or both of your parents is a quaker, you sail through like a breeze, no matter how inaccurate how inarticulate or illiterate you may be on the theory of pacifism or indeed qualicurism itself. At the opposite end of the spectrum from pacifism, we have a pusillanimous reluctance to use religious names for warring factions. In Northern Ireland, Catholics and Protestants are euphemized to nationalists and loyalists respectively. Their very word religious is borderalized to communities, as in inter-community warfare. Iraq, as a consequence of the Anglo-American invasion of 2003, degenerated into sectarian civil war between Sunni and Shia Muslims, clearly a religious conflict. Yet, in the Independent of 20 May 2006, a front page headline and the first leading article both described it as ethnic cleansing. Ethnic in this context is yet another euphemism. What we are seeing in Iraq is religious cleansing. This original usage of ethnic cleansing in the former Yugoslavia is also arguably a euphemism for religious cleansing involving Orthodox Serbs, Catholics, Croats, and Muslim Bosnians. I have previously drawn attention to the prevailing of religion in public discussion of ethics in the media and in government. Whether a controversy arises over sexual or reproductive morals, you can bet that religious leaders from several different faith groups will be prominently represented on influential committees or on panel discussions on radio or television. I'm not suggesting that we should go out of our ways to censor the views of these peoples, but why does our society beat a path to their door as though they had some expertise comparable to that of, say, a moral philosopher, a family lawyer, or doctor? Here's another weird example of the privileging of religion. On 21st February 2006, the United States Supreme Court ruled in accordance with the Constitution that a church in New Mexico should be exempt from the law, which everybody else has to obey, against the taking of hallucinogenic drugs. Eight faithful members of the Centro Espírita Beneficent Union do Vigatal believe that they can understand God only by drinking house cutty, which contains the illegal hallucinogenic drug dimethyltryptamine. Note that it is sufficient that they believe that the drug enhances their understanding. They do not have to produce evidence. Conversely, there is a plenty of evidence that cannabis eases the nausea and discomfort of cancer sufferers undergoing chemotherapy. Yet, again, in accordance with the Constitution, the Supreme Court ruled 2005 that all patients who use cannabis for medical purposes are vulnerable to federal prosecution. Even in the minority of states where such specialist use is legalized, religion as ever is trump card. Religion as ever is a trump card. Imagine members of an art appreciation society pleading in court that they believe they need a hallucinogenic drug in order to enhance their understanding of impressionists or surrealists paintings. Yet, when a church claims an equivalent need, it is backed by the highest court in the land. Such is the power of religion as a talisman. 18 years ago, I was one of 36 writers and artists commissioned by the magazine New Statement to write in the support of distinguished author Salman Rushdie. then under sentence of death for writing a novel incensed by the sympathy for Muslim hurt and often expressed by Christian leaders and even some secular opinion farmers. I drew the following parallel. If the advocates of apartheid had their wits about them, they would claim, for all I know truthfully, that allowing mixed races is against their religion. A good part of the opposition would respectfully tiptoe away, and it is no use claiming that this is an unfair parallel, because apartheid has no rational justification. The whole point of religious faith is strength, and chief glory is that it does not depend on rational justification. The rest of us are expected to defend our prejudices, but ask a religious person to justify their faith and you infringe religious liberty. Little did I know that something pretty similar would come to pass in the 21st century. The Los Angeles Times, 10 April 2006, reported that numerous Christian groups on campuses around the United States were suing their universities for enforcing anti-discrimination rule, including prohibition against harassing or abusing homosexuals. As a typical example, in 2004, James Nixon, a 20-year-old boy in Ohio, won the right in court to wear a t-shirt to school bearing the words, "Homosexuality is a sin, Islam is a lie, abortion is a murder. Some issues are just black and white." The school told him not to wear the t-shirt, and the boy's parents sued the school. The parents might have had a conscionable case if they had based it on the First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of speech, but they didn't. Instead, the Nixon lawyers appealed to the constitutional right to the freedom of religion. Their victorious lawsuit was supported by the Alliance Defense Fund of Arizona, whose business it is to press the legal battle for religious freedom. The Reverend Rick Scarborough, supporting the wave of familiar Christian lawsuit brought to establish religion as a legal justification for discrimination against homosexuals and other groups, has named it the civil rights struggle of the 21st century. Christians are going to have to take a stand for the right to be Christian. Once again, if such people took their stand on the right to free speech, one might reluctantly sympathize. But that isn't what it is about. The right to be Christian seems, in this case, to mean the right to poke your nose into other people's private lives. The legal case in favor of discrimination against homosexuals is mounted as a countersuit against alleged religious discrimination, and the law seems to respect this. You can't get away with saying, "If you try to stop me from insulting homosexuals, it violates my freedom of prejudice." But you can get away with saying, "It violates my freedom of religion." What when you think about it is the difference? Yet again, religion trumps all. I'll end the chapter with a particular case study which tellingly illuminates society's exaggerated respect for religion over and above ordinary human respect. The case flared up in 2006, a ludicrous episode which veered widely between extremes of comedy and tragedy. The previous September, the Danish newspaper Jellyland's Poston published 12 cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad. Was next 3 months. Indignation was carefully and symmetrically nurtured throughout the Islamic world by a small group of Muslims living in Denmark, led by 2 imams who had been granted sanctuary there. In late 2005, these malevolent exiles traveled from Denmark to Egypt bearing a desire which was copied and circulated from the whole Islamic world, including, importantly, Indonesia. The desire contained falsehood about alleged maltreatment of Muslims in Denmark and the trendiness trenditious lie that Gilliland's Post was a government-run newspaper. It also contained that the 12 cartoons, which crucially the Imams had supplemented with 3 additional images whose origin was mysterious but which certainly had no connection with Denmark, unlike the original 12. These 3 adds-ons were genuinely offensive, or would have been if they had, as the jealous propagandists alleged, depicted Muhammad. A particularly damaging on these 3 was not a cartoon at all, but a faked photograph of a bearded man wearing a fake pig's snout held on with elastic. It has subsequently turned out that this was an Associated Press photograph of a Frenchman interred for a pig squealing contest at a country fair in France. The photograph had no connection whatsoever with the Prophet Muhammad, no connection with Islam, and no connection with Denmark. But the Muslim activists, on their mischief-stirring hike to Cairo, implied all 3 connections, with predictable results. The carefully cultivated hurt and offense was brought to an explosive head 5 months after the 12 cartoons were originally published. Demonstrators in Pakistan and Indonesia burned Danish flags. Where did they get them from? And hysterical demands were made for the Danish government to apologize. Apologize for what? They didn't draw the cartoons or publish them. They just live in a country with a free press, something that people in many Islamic countries might have a hard time understanding. Newspaper in Norway, Germany, France, and even the United States, but conspicuously not Britain, reprinted the cartoon in gestures of solidarity with Jaliland's Post, which added fuel to the flames. Embassies and consulates were trashed. Danish goods were boycotted. Danish citizens and indeed Westerners generally were physically threatened. Christian churches in Pakistan with no Danish or European connections at all were burned. 9 people were killed when Libyan writers attacked and burned the Italian consulate in Benghazi. As Jermaine Greer wrote, what these people really love and do best is pandemonium. A bounty of $1 million was placed on the head of the Danish cartoonist by a Pakistani imam, who was apparently unaware that there were 12 different Danish cartoonists, and almost certainly unaware that the 3 most offensive pictures had never appeared in Denmark at all. And by the way, where was the million going to come from? In Nigeria, Muslim protesters against the Danish cartoons were burned down several Christian churches and used matches to attack and kill black Nigerians. Christians in the streets. One Christian was put inside a rubber tire, dosed with petrol and set alight. Demonstrators were photographed in Britain bearing banners saying, "Slay those who insult Islam. Butcher those who mock Islam. Europe, you will pay. Demolition is on the way." And behead those who insult Islam. Fortunately, our political leaders were on hand to remind us that Islam is a religion of peace and mercy. In the aftermath of all this, the journalist Andrew Mueller interviewed Britain's leading moderate Muslim, Sir Iqbal Sakran. Moderate he may be, by today's Islamic standards, but in Andrew
Mueller's count, he still stands by the remark he made when Salman Rushdie was condemned to death for writing a novel. Death is perhaps too easy for him. A remark that sets him in ignominious contrast of his courageous predecessor as Britain's most influential Muslim, the late Dr. Zaki Badawi, who offered Salman Rushdie sanctuary in his own home. Sakrani told Mueller how concerned he was about the Danish cartoons. Mueller was concerned too, but for a different reason. I am concerned that the ridiculous, disproportionate reaction for some unfunny sketches in an obscure Scandinavian newspaper may confirm that. Islam and the West are fundamentally irreconcilable. Sakrine, on the other hand, praised British newspaper for not reprinting the cartoons, to which Mueller voiced the suspicion of most of the nation that the restraint of British newspapers derived less from sensitivity to Muslim discontent that it did from a desire not to have their windows broken. Sakrine explained that the person of Prophet, peace be upon him, is revered so profoundly in the Muslim world with a love and affection that cannot be explained in words. It goes beyond your parents, your loved ones, your children. This is part of the faith. There is also an Islamic teaching that one does not depict the Prophet. This rather assumes, as Mueller's observed, that the value of Islam trumps anyone else, which is what any follower of Islam does not assume, just as any followers of any religion believes that theirs is sole way, truth and light. If possible, wish to love a 7th century preacher more than their own families. That's up to them, but nobody else is obliged to take it seriously. Except that if you do not take it seriously and accord it proper respect, you are physically threatened on a scale that no other religion has aspired to since the Middle Ages. One can't help wondering why such violence is necessary, given that a Mueller's note, if any of you clowns are right about anything, the cartoonists are going to hell anyway. Won't do that. Won't that do? In the meantime, if you want to get excited about affronts to Muslims, read the Amnesty International report on Sharia in Saudi Arabia. Many people have noticed the contrast between the hysterical hurt professed by Muslims and the readiness with which Arab media publish stereotypical anti-Jewish cartoons. At the demonstration in Pakistan against the Danish cartoons, a woman in black burqa was photographed carrying a banner reading "God bless Hitler." In response to all this frangized pandemonium, decent liberal newspapers deplored the violence and made token noise about free speech, but at the same time, they expressed respect and sympathy for deep offense and hurt that Muslim had suffered. The hurt and suffering consisted, remember, not in any person enduring violence or real pain of any kind. Nothing more than a few daubs of printing ink in a newspaper that nobody outside Denmark would ever have heard of, but for a deliberate campaign of incitement to mayhem. I am not in a favor of offending or hurting anyone just for the sake of it, but I am intrigued and mystified by the disproportionate revealing of religion in our otherwise secular society. All politicians must get used to disrespectful cartoons of their faces, and nobody riots in their defense. But what is so special about religion that we grant it such uniquely privileged respect? As H.L. Lacans said, we must respect the other fellow's religion, but only in the sense and to the extent that we respect his history, to the extent that we respect his theory that his wife is beautiful and his children smart. It is the light of unparalleled presumption of respect for religion that I make my own disclaimer for this book. I shall not go out of my way to offend, but nor shall I, don't kid, close to handle religion any more gently than I would handle anything else. Our sport during lessons was a sidetrack him away from scripture and towards tiring tales of fighter command and the fear. The second chapter is the God hypothesis. We'll listen it in the next episode.